Hi, everybody, and welcome to Basic Black. Some of you are joining us on our broadcast, and others of you are joining us on our digital platforms. I'm Crystal Haynes, your host. Tonight, a spotlight on education and preparing students for jobs of the future. Growing up, for many of us attending school, the goal was to get an education that would lead to a good job and economic prosperity. But after 4 years of COVID, the challenges to educate students have increased, from the need for more instruction, improved test scores, to issues of mental health. Jobs are changing as technology and innovation continues to advance and develop. Some jobs that are here today may not exist in the future, or additional skills or education will be required. That is the best way to help students of color learn and thrive as they prepare for occupations of tomorrow. We're asking, what is that best way? Joining us to discuss is Dr. Aisha Francis, President and CEO of Benjamin Franklin Cummings Institute of Technology in Boston. Marcus Walker is a humanities teacher at Fenway High School. And Ron Dorsey is the Chief Impact Officer at Eastern Bank Foundation and former Chief of Education for the City of Boston. He's also a member of the GBH Board of Advisors. And Carolina Brito is the principal of the Rafael Hernandez K-8 School. That's a bilingual school in Roxbury. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Francis, I think hearing about the Cummings School being built right there in community was so exciting for so many. Tell me what it'll mean to have this amazing academic facility be right there in the heart of the community.
Well, first of all, I just want to also share with folks that Ron Dorsey is our board chair.
Okay,
in addition to the wonderful accolades that you shared. So our college is moving to Nubian Square. That move has been made possible by tremendous public-private partnerships, including wonderful support from Mayor Michelle Wu, from the Healy Driscoll administration, and from federal support as well, in addition to private donors. And we are very excited about moving to a place where about 15% of our students reside, and half of our students are Boston students. And what we do that's different and special is that we offer technical and trade education. We're a 2-year college. A lot of our majors are only available at our college unless you go far west. So, we want non-traditional post-secondary education to be more accessible and available to all students, and particularly students of color. And so we're excited about the new campus, and we should be occupying that campus in the fall of 2025. And the groundbreaking was Tuesday. It was wonderful.
Yeah. And Ron, now that I know that you're also on the board there, right?
I know how to follow good leaders.
You know what? I'm also thoughtful of, I always think of the phrase, if you see it, you believe it. Mm-hmm. And having it right there in Nubian Square must make a big difference for young people.
It does. So first of all, I think Nubian Square fondly is referred to as the Education Innovation District in Boston. So it's a privilege for us to join that community from cradle to career and to offer another option for students. I think what makes Franklin Cummings special is that it's a talent accelerator. It thinks about capability through the delivery of education. So it's about what you know and what you can do. And so I think being in a setting where you produce things that have real world value, you're taught by people who are trained and applied in their craft, and we've got a fishbowl now in Nubian Square where you can look in the window, see green jobs happening, see the training for that happening. I think it's really going to be an inspiration and something that will expand the imagination for how our young people participate and thrive in the economy.
Yeah, we mentioned COVID as one of these big, challenges in trying to get kids to the point where they are thriving. COVID, setting back test scores, setting back social emotional things. Marcus, talk to me about what it's been like in the classroom, teaching kids, especially as we sort of walk out of the height or crisis point of the pandemic.
Yeah, definitely. So it's clear to everybody that the kind of the lockdown and having virtual school just didn't work for students. It exacerbated, any kind of mental health issues that were there. Students low income, already in poverty. That was all exacerbated because of that. And then now that they've come back, you know, the biggest problem that we're seeing at Fenway, and I know it's a problem kind of across the district, is absenteeism, chronic absenteeism. You know, right now at Fenway, we know we have a senior absentee rate that's, you know, below 80%, which is unusual, especially for seniors, because at that point they've kind of figured out and they, you know, kind of motivated as far as what they do. I have a class in particular where, sadly, so many of my students are kind of going through mental health issues, and it's just hard to come to school. And you know, we are concerned. We're definitely quite concerned about, you know, where that's going to go. I can say, though, schools like the Benjamin Franklin Cummings Institute, schools like that definitely make a difference for my students. I think that they, you know, for better or worse, have a sense of kind of schools that, you know, that are quote unquote maybe for them and schools that are not for them. You know, they still refer to the school as BFIT, its old name.
Yeah.
And when I hear students that do become aware of the institute, and they know maybe older brothers or older cousins that have gone or have, you know, at least, you know, checked out the school. It's just a different conversation. You know, they're kind of, a lot of students who are interested in the trades, they become much more excited, and they feel like, okay, you know, this actually could be an institution that'll work for me. So that's
yeah.
Yeah.
Carolina, you know, I know you talk to teachers all the time about trying to help kids through the COVID and things that the challenges that brought, but also we're thinking about achievement gaps and showing up and things like that. How do you coach your staff to be able to meet that need while meeting so many other requirements that the state has put upon teachers? My husband's a teacher himself. He's a high school teacher in Malden. So I know that there are a lot of state requirements, but there's also some intangibles that need to happen in the classroom to meet the needs for students.
So I think what we grew as a community through COVID. And I think that growth was really not in the typical school ways. It was we were in people's houses. Like, we were driving around like Lyft drivers with Chromebooks and like bags of groceries, right? We've seen some things, we've done some things. And I think because our teacher corps saw homes and like went across the city. We're a citywide school, right? I think two things happened. One, the commitment to the bilingual mission in the heart of Roxbury is really, really important to us, but in a different way, right? Like, our building was built by a huge community of Boricua parents who wanted quality bilingual education for their kids. And the fact that we were in people's homes connected us back to what we were trying to do in '73. Right. So it's like we've got this second generation of commitment to like education as a civic activism move. And so then how do we marry the fact that we now know each other in this different way to the fact that we now have like an achievement debt, right?
Yeah.
And we owe people years of schooling, and like how do we figure out how to like close this thing? Right, so I think for us, it's been trying to marry mission with like urgency to do right by our people, because you invited us in, right? Yeah. So it's almost like a moral obligation when we talk about schooling, or when we talk about like how do we figure out how to be brilliant bilingual humans. Yeah. I think I'm no longer able to talk about achievement without talking about the commitment to our people, because it just doesn't. Like, our experience has been so difficult and traumatic collectively that I think we feel a debt to each other. And our families, because we were in people's homes, like, you know, having our cafecitos, they're in the building. So we have a whole job training program for moms who want to be teachers in the building. In fact, the City of Boston just actually signed a grant commitment with us so that we do, like, job development while we're educating kids. Moms are learning. I taught 2.5 hours yesterday actually, with a group of moms who are like, okay, so teaching 101.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So stuff that I would have done in PD for teachers, we're doing with parents so that they can be with us in community and classrooms.
It's that wraparound that is
so
important. And even as the kids transition out of primary and secondary school, we're also seeing out of the pandemic that those social emotional mental health issues continue into college. And we know that students are saying that in college, they're still struggling. Like they've done all the things to get to college, all the things they're supposed to. And then they show up to college and they have all of this stress in terms of their mental health, in terms of navigating new spaces. How do you talk to, Dr. Francis, these college-ready kids? These kids who are in college, and they're just they're like, we're smart enough to be here, but the rest of it, we don't know how to manage that.
Right, and we have seen an increased requests and demands for our wellness services, which is, what we call mental health support. We do have a licensed social worker on staff, and we have some additional support that we can bring in when those resources are overwhelmed. We are working from a referral model. We are a commuter campus. We really thrive on being a close-knit community. We've got about 1,000 students, and so we do know students well. We also rely on faculty, in addition to success coaches and the wellness team, to really kind of create a surround sound and an opportunity for us to kind of flag for each other when students might be having trouble, even if they don't bring it up themselves. I think the other thing that we're really looking to learn more about is because we pull so much from the public school systems. Boston Public Schools, about 40% of our students are from Boston Public Schools, and really the vast majority of our students are from public schools around the greater Boston area. So what are we seeing in the high schools that we know can be sort of predictors of experience, and how do we really prepare in advance for what we're likely to see? For instance, with chronic absenteeism, showing up in schools as early as elementary schools now, chronic absenteeism, we've been learning more about that. So what does that mean in terms of our expectations for how you show up and how we support, set high expectations, and then also invest high support to make sure that students can meet those expectations. Again, whether they're raising their hands and saying, hey, I'm struggling here, or whether they aren't doing that, but we can see through their output that they need some additional help. So we're really relying on each other as well as the students to create more of a sustained kind of fabric of support that will help our students get through. And we have really wonderful results. We can always do better, but more than half of our students graduate, which for two-year colleges, that's actually a wonderful outcome.
It's a big deal.
And so, we know that our approach is working, and so what we're really focused on is how do we tweak what we're doing, and how do we keep, moving from good to great, as the old saying goes. Yeah. But, in service of the students and keeping that student first approach.
Yeah. Ron, I know you've been in so many of these spaces with these thought leaders around this. In terms of bridging that gap, that social emotional gap with the drive to achieve and things like that, what are you seeing that's being done well?
So what I'm a fan of is Boston's continuing exploration of figuring out how to wrap around and to do it in a two-generation way. So we're thinking about hub schools, which is a permutation of the community schools model. And I want to give a shout out to Claire Shaw, Matt LaPuma, Jeff Riley, and some other folks who are really some of the progenitors of that work in Boston in the late 90s and through the early 2000s, but really trying to think about how to evolve that. Paul Revel and his team exploring children's cabinets, which they've done across the state and nationally. I think Boston has to wrestle a little bit with the form, but the aspiration is exactly right. And it's got to include mom, dad, aunt, uncle, grandmom, or whatever, because to the degree that those challenges around wellness are showing up in school, family is struggling, community is struggling. So, yeah, we've got to get it right for the student, but we've got to get it right for everybody at home as well. I think the advantage that Boston has, whatever form it takes, we've got the wellness assets in the community. I think our challenge has always been a management challenge. Do we put all of that under one roof and ask schools to be multi-service agencies, which is hard work, when the prime directive is high quality teaching and learning? Or do we figure out another network management system that brings the best of the hospitals close to you, that brings the best of community health close to you. We can get there. We've got the right aspiration. I think it's a design challenge for us now.
Yeah. We put a lot of emphasis on standardized tests, the MCAS specifically. We know black and brown kids are trailing behind their white counterparts, especially as we move out of the pandemic. Marcus, my question to you is, what role do you think standardized tests sort of hurt black and brown kids in terms of perhaps their confidence and perhaps even as they move out of primary and secondary education? Yeah, so the MCAS and other standardized testing, I see that as ways to kind of measure what I prefer. Instead of saying the achievement gap, I prefer to refer to it as the education debt. And I think the MCAS is it's supposed to measure where students are at a certain point, but I think the issue with it is that we have this test, which is very high stakes, but there is no kind of attempt to address the really underlying kind of systemic issues that are there. I think about the term, because you were talking before about students that are college ready, perhaps going into an institute. And I think about that term, what that means, college ready. And then I also hear Ron talking about the wraparound services and being generational. I feel like, all of these are attempts, I think, to close that education debt. And I feel like sometimes we should kind of frame the conversation more that this it's an ongoing thing. It's ongoing for children starting basically from zero and all the way through college, and it's ongoing also for the parents as well. Just to kind of put in an MCAS and kind of measure students if they're proficient or they're not proficient, but then not again providing those wraparound services and everything for there. I think that just ultimately does a disservice to students. And I imagine also, Carolina, in a school where the focus is bilingual education, and then you have this test that's not necessarily geared toward that, it can be an immense challenge.
Yeah, and I mean, just to add to what you were saying too, I think the minute we became a hub school, officially we were deciding, we've always done some of this stuff on the side, but it's going to be central to mission. Incidentally, we had our best year of MCAS data last year, 2 years into a hub school model. I think they're compatible. I think the part that frustrates me about the conversation around testing, there's two axles that frustrate me deeply, is that the proportion of the time that we spend in communities of color testing kids and then not doing much with that information or doing anything about the gaps that they uncover is wild. Yeah. But because we're also sometimes testing in Spanish, I'm losing about 10 instructional days out of the 180 a year, right? That's 10 days I'm not going to get back. And then the other piece of it, too, is it's exhausting to constantly be narrating the MCAS as, the goal, when actually you walk into suburbia that ain't nobody talking about the MCAS. Yeah. The MCAS is the floor. It's not the ceiling. Yeah. So to me, it's frustrating that we aren't allowed to collectively imagine a higher ceiling because we're always dancing on the floor. And so because you're not talking about the ceiling, then you're never going to move this stuff. But, I wouldn't even care that deeply about the MCAS if I were given permission to, I think we can do it this way, and I promise you it'll show up over here, right? And the freedom to be able to do this is, really the dream. Yeah. But I have noticed that being holistic around what human beings need, generations of people educating one another. My moms are brilliant teachers. I've hired 6 of them to be paraprofessionals. Is that the best way to get kids to learn? Is that holistic approach? I mean, in my opinion, I don't think, if you think about freedom schools, or you think about, what our people do when we think about schooling and, bilingualism, white supremacy culture is what we see in public education. And it works really well for white people. Yeah. Right? So what would it look like if our communities, our people, were designing our schools? Maybe our kids would do well because it was designed for and by us, right? Yeah. And that's why bilingual education is so attractive to me, because it's one of these pockets where this is the Latino house. We welcome you to it. Yeah. And it works. Yeah. For white kids, too, who happen to be here. But it's our model. This is how we do things. Yeah. And I think that has promise. Yeah, that's huge. And I'm also thoughtful, once you get into college, you've done the best you could and you're moving on to,
hopefully careers and hopefully closing the wealth gap that people of color are experiencing, especially here in Greater Boston. The tools to help you get there, you know, Biden forgiving some college loans and things like that. Do we think that that's the direction we need to go to get to the place where Black and brown people are closer to parity? Because it seems like we're working to do really well in school, we're working to get to college to get the jobs, but it doesn't seem like the achievement piece is closer to parity than we have been working towards. And I point to the National Urban League study that showed that it would take, you know, still over 100, 200 years to even reach parity with our white counterparts. So I'm curious, Dr. Francis, your thoughts on that. Is it more federal government intervention? Is it an overhaul of our public school system?
You know, I think there are multiple ways that we have to attack a systemic divestment from the ability for Black and brown people, to even read. I mean, literacy was literally outlawed in this country for whole swaths of people for hundreds of years. So clearly there's some amelioration that needs to happen in a different way. But, you know, I think there are a number of solutions. So the Hernandez is a community school. My children are actually at the Hernandez, which is wonderful. And we didn't know that we were going to be on the show together today. But I think, you know, Franklin Cummings Tech is also a Hispanic serving institution. We're an MSI, Hispanic serving institution, which means that you really need to, I think, be wired to understand that a lot of students are coming to our school with multiple languages in their toolbox, and that's a strength. It's not a deficit. You know, that's a superpower that people have navigated multiple languages and are, you know, literate across multiple types of planes. And so what we try to focus on is the strengths. It's that asset support instead of focusing so much on where folks might be deficient, quote unquote, among, you know, a kind of a I don't want to say random because I know a lot of work goes into testing, but somewhat arbitrary, you know, list. So our outcomes are job placement rates, graduation rates, and earnings. I think that's a different set of outcomes. And do we want our students, are they earning, you know, as much as possible? Do they have negotiation skills? Are we teaching them how to ask for even more money? Are we building their confidence? Do they know what to expect in the job place, in the workplace, you know, in terms of what they should be earning, you know, how to ask for bonuses and overtime. I remember a student, a graduate, talking with me about, and he had been out of school a couple of years, about an opportunity he had for a raise. And he was considering not taking it because the raise would move him from an hourly employee to a salaried employee. And when you're hourly, you can, you're eligible for overtime. And so he knew how to calculate earnings. If I need more money, I just work more hours. And when you're salaried, you know, he was basically like, they can work me forever and I'll earn the same thing.
Right.
But it puts you in a different track, right? It moves you into a different trajectory in terms of your career ladder. So this young man did take the role. He's since been promoted twice. And so now, but that was a conversation that he needed to have, and he didn't have anyone with whom to have that. So are we a place, are we an institution, are we a school where people can have those conversations that they don't necessarily have access to be able to have in the home? And I think those kinds of things, while it might be hard to call that a particular type of intervention, that's important. It's an important resource for people to be able to come back to a place like ours after they've graduated to help navigate their way through what it means to actually earn your way into parity.
Absolutely.
In terms of the economic sense.
And Ron, I'll let you have the last word in the last minute of the show here.
Let me be delicate about what I'm going to say next. So I want to name that education is an inherent good and a necessity for our progress, community level, national level. It is not the silver bullet on closing the wealth gap. So two things need to happen at the same time. We need to set our young people up for success. At the same time, we need to figure out what the wealth transfer in this country is going to be to achieve the parity that you want. By the time I left government, I think I was working as much on affordable housing access, guaranteed income, and a few other things to ask the question, if we set households up for resource and financial success, does it have an impact on learning? I'm concerned that sometimes we tell families, hang in with us for 12 years, 16 years, and let's see what happens when we actually know statistically that the link between education and economic mobility in America is actually fairly weak and designed to be so. So if we think that there are resource barriers at the beginning, let's take those out of the way for families and let them thrive in the ways that they know how to thrive.
And I want to continue this conversation, but that is the end of our broadcast and the end of our show. Thank you so much to all of our guests, and thank you for watching. Now stay with us as we continue this conversation on our digital platforms, YouTube and Facebook. Hi, everybody. I'm Crystal Haynes, your host. We are on YouTube and Facebook with our post show, continuing our discussion on preparing students of color for the jobs of the future. And Ron, I know we were just left off on talking about you mentioned that education is not that silver bullet to wealth and success, or even parity in the U.S. So I wonder if you could finish that point there.
Yeah, and maybe let me say further that education is the key to future readiness.
Yeah.
Like, we're not going to be future ready without well-educated young people and a diversity of well-educated young people. But to do the reparative work that we need to do, and you referenced the Urban League report, earning our way across the wealth gap over hundreds of years is really just a form of perpetuating dispossession. If we're serious about the reparative work, we need mass capital transfer, and other pieces that position families of color for economic success in this country at an accelerated rate. Not way down the line, but tomorrow, if not sooner.
Do we need to, Marcus, change the way we are approaching teaching, especially for kids of color? I'm thoughtful of, we have a big anniversary since the Brown versus the Board of Education decision coming up this year. And so I'm thoughtful, do we need to change our approaches in the classroom, our curriculums, things like that? Absolutely.
I mean, I think one of the first steps is changing our approach to just resources, basic resources. I mean, if I do a simple a comparison of the facilities at Fenway High School to the comparison at, say, like a Westwood High School, it's not even close. You know, for instance, we don't have a gym. We don't have really an auditorium. Our cafeteria and our auditorium kind of double as the same. I think about the elite private schools where the tuition is so high, and I wonder, you know, as a country, as a nation, do we have the resources to provide for every single student in this nation? The high-quality education that, you know, President Biden was talking about during the State of the Union address, and I think all past presidents have talked about how American students all deserve a high-quality education, but I think it's just clear. You can just open your eyes and look at the differences between some of the infrastructure of some of our Boston schools versus the infrastructure that some of our suburban schools have. Within the classroom, yes, we do need to have a different approach. I have curiosity about, at these elite schools, what type of innovation they have, what type of access do they have to places and different spaces, and being able to get on a plane and go to a different country to learn there or whatever else. I think if we are serious, it would cost a massive amount of money, and I know that's what, you know, in ways that Ron is talking about as well. But if we were serious, that's something that we could do. but I'm just not sure. I'm not sure if we're serious. I don't know.
It's a difficult thing because, and Carolina, I'm pointing this question to you, is that it seemed like in the pandemic, we can, get huge sums of money together to address a big problem, but it seems like the gaps in our education system still went unanswered. When we're talking about some of the funding that came down through the pipe on COVID, President Biden mentioning, wanting all the kids to have, every child in the U.S. to have access to this type of, college readiness and things like that. What needs to change in the classroom to get us there? And I know that you're doing, some really innovative things at your school, but I feel like not all principals feel empowered to do those types of things.
I mean, I think yes, there are things within our locus of control in the classroom that I think a lot about, right? Like, how do we build consciousness among our folks of things like, Ron, you're talking about, like generational wealth gaps and the way that it affects future earnings and possibilities, right? I don't think it's an option for kids not to know about those things. So the locus of control within the curricular access in the classroom of like, what do you need to know about the circumstances around you that have led to the world that you live in right now? Because if you don't know, you can't control it. You can't like change the outcome, right? So there are things that we can put in classrooms that are different, but like from my seat, right, dancing between the floor and the balcony, the role for me has become increasingly political. And it sort of is startling because I'm a teacher first. I insist on teaching a 7th and 8th grade seminar in my school right now, right? So that I understand what it's like on the ground. But I suddenly find myself in an enormous, exhausting amount of political advocacy at the central office level, or like trying to manage budgets to do some of the innovative things that I think are working. Like right now we have a early pilot rollout of a 3-teacher system where folks are we're increasing the capacity on the ground, increasing teachers on the floor so that we're not doing special pull-out education services in some classroom closet, that kids are getting what they need and have access to Tier 1. It's a basic idea. You put another qualified human being to increase the impact of like adult attention in the room. It's not fancy. But the financial hurdles that we have to jump in the public system to ensure that you are properly staffed to execute on the work is wild. So then the percentage of my time that's spent in advocacy or central office meetings or like conversations on why this is necessary or why this need is urgent then puts me in the situation of like, I'm advocating, and we have 124 other schools that are all doing the same thing, right? So then it puts us in like this awful peer competition for limited resources around what we can get and fight for kids, right? So I think and I've noticed that the creativity and the capacity to be able to do the brilliant classroom stuff that we need to do, innovation on curriculum, which is like stuff I've heard you talk a lot about, Marcus, is limited when you are trying to survive because you don't know if that 3rd teacher is going to be there or not next year. So then you have to scale down your level of ambition, of intellectual creativity, because you have to fight for some basics. And so I think there's a big interplay between our capacity to be creative here in the classroom if we can't secure here at the level of policy or politics.
And I imagine, Dr. Francis, when they get to college and they realize that their peers may have had a different experience in school and they may be farther behind than their peers because they went to a private school or they went to a different school with more resources. How then do you address some of those gaps there to get kids to, graduating college on the same level?
Well, we try to do everything we can to be student ready as opposed to putting all of the emphasis on students to be college ready, whatever, those things mean. We are test optional. We aren't really looking at things like AccuPlacer to put students in quote unquote remedial courses, or we're really working to redesign our math curriculum so that we are catching students up in a co-curricular way so that they go ahead and are enrolled in their major courses, and then we supplement, basically give them tutoring, which is, tutoring it's not a remedial concept. It's something that requires resources that a lot of students haven't had access to. I will say, generally, by and large, since most of our students come from public schools, we don't necessarily have this classroom moment where students are looking around and saying, these students had access to something that I didn't. I think one of the interesting concepts, though, or the interesting outgrowth of our investment in early college, because we have early college programming, is we have a lot of high school students. 20% of our students are high school students who are being able, who have the opportunity to earn not just minimal college credits, although any college exposure I think is helpful, but we know the type of college exposure in high school that leads to college attainment and graduation is at least 12 credits or more. So if you can earn 12 credits or more, it doesn't only have to be early college. It can be through the IB program or through AP courses. But all of those kinds of modalities of exposure help students to have more excitement, more motivation, and it helps actually high school feel more fulfilling because they have a greater sense of, why am I doing this? Why am I sitting here in this classroom learning about various things? Not everybody has access to, I think, engaging modalities, as you heard Carolina and Marcus talk about. And so one of the things that can help is infusing more, college exposure into the high school experience. And so those students are very excited. And we know we've been delivering early college programming since 2007, that students who receive at least 12 credits or more, we have a program where students can actually earn an entire year of college credit. And then starting in the fall, we'll have a program which will allow students to graduate from high school with their associate degree at the same time, simultaneously.
It's that payoff that they want. And it answers
earlier.
that question, what are we doing here?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I love that. Brian, what do you think needs to change, I guess, in the system, whether it be primary, secondary education?
It's a big question.
It is. We're big thinkers.
We're big thinkers. So, first of all, I think we need to adopt a capability-based pedagogical framework.
Yeah.
So really thinking about what's the integrated content and skill that we need young people to develop over the arc of their school career. Fortunately, I think Boston has the foundation for it. Last 5 years or so, they've worked on the College Career and Life Readiness Framework that is not universally adopted, but I actually think is an elegant articulation of that marriage of knowledge and skill. It needs to be back mapped across the grade span to kind of figure out what's appropriate for a first grader on this trajectory, a fifth grader, a 12th grader. Then we need to think about what's the assessment that goes with that. And it's not just the standardized piece, but how do we know that young people are succeeding? How do we know where to play to their strengths? How do we know where to help them address their challenges? And it may be more of a 360 learning view of what they do. It's as much about documenting what's happening in the classroom as what's happening in their after-school program, those youth development experts who see them on a daily basis, what's happening at home for our high school students, what their employers see as well. But I think we need kind of a more modern paradigm for how we're thinking about development, figuring out how school becomes the hub for that, but thinking about a more comprehensive accounting for learning time. Not all school time is learning time, but school time is not all learning time.
Very well said. Well, we are out of time right now, so we'll have to end it here. What an amazing discussion. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Crystal Haynes. Have a great night.